Hey, what's up, y'all? Thank you for tuning in to our first installment of Tiny Talks. Now, before we move forward, I would like to give a big old shout out to Canvas Coffee House for giving us a place to discuss today's topics. Now, without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our host for today, Chris House.
Hey, what's going on? I'm good, man.
Yeah,
Good. Chilling, cool. I'm Chris House, worship leader, musician, creative, all-around passionate person for music and justice, racial equality, all those things. So we're just here to have a pretty much conversation with some few friends around this topic. So before we get started, let's just start on the end here. Let everybody introduce themselves with real brief name, where you from, stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm Tim McCain. I'm a pastor of Freedom Life Church here in Hampton. And I'm really excited to be here and tackle some of these topics.
Cool, man. Happy to have you.
What's good, everybody? I'm Sean Slaughter, realtor, teacher, and DJ. Think about that. Married to beautiful Kentrice and have two gorgeous daughters. And I think this topic is extremely important, and happy to be here.
Hi, my name is Staley. I'm a worship leader. I've lived here in Hampton for a while, and definitely an advocate for social justice and just open to learning even more on the subject.
Cool. Liz.
Oh,
Great.
My name is Maya Torres. I'm from New York City. I am what they like to call an honorary intern at Freedom Life Church on the worship team, and I'm also a dietetics student, and I'm happy to be here.
Cool.
I'm Justin White. I'm a pastor at the City Life Church, so I get to worship with Chris on the weekends.
Yeah,
and the Renaissance man, Sean. It's good to be here. I'm passionate about this, and Chris invited me out, so I'm definitely honored to be here to listen to.
Last but not least.
Hi, hello, my name is Nina Brewton. They call me the bald-head queen.
Come on, sis.
I'm a creative and social entrepreneur, if you will, host, performance artist, and benefit auctioneer. So I help organizations raise money to do the work that's important to them. In the age of COVID and all things 2020, I have definitely found my voice and am finding my voice along with a lot of you in this talk around social justice and what it means to truly be the body of Christ. And so I'm very happy to be here with you all. Thank you.
Cool. It's good to have everybody. So I guess we all know why we're here. You know, we're living in such a interesting time. I guess that's the best word I can use at the moment. We're in a global pandemic with COVID. We're also experiencing I don't want to say civil unrest, but we're in an interesting place in our country. An awakening, another awakening, right? Seeing, dealing with stuff like police brutality, racial injustice, in the healthcare system, just in schools and even in churches, just in general. I know a lot of our topic will be kind of based around race today, but you know, we're just gonna have a conversation, just see where it goes and how long it goes and all that stuff. All right, so let's start out with this. Why do we think, or why is it that the topic of race and racism and social injustice is such a hard discussion topic us here in America? Anybody can take that. We're just gonna throw it out there and somebody take it. Why do we think that the topic of racism and social injustice is such a difficult topic for us to talk about?
Fear. People are afraid to talk to each other. People are afraid to talk to other races.
Right.
They're afraid to expose, and especially now with, you know, this cancel culture.
Right.
You're afraid that if I say to you how I'm feeling, you might jack me.
Right.
Right? If I didn't say the wrong thing or the right thing. Right? You're gonna cancel. So I think fear is a big reason why people are afraid to discuss it.
Fear. Yeah.
I think people are afraid to discuss it. It'd have been different if this country did not have a racist foundation. Then we had racist issues, and then we were talking as if, let's get back to what this country should be.
Right.
The problem is the very foundation of this country is racist. It was founded by racists.
Right.
And so we're really digging up the foundation. We're breaking the cement. And we're trying to say, not let's go back to something that we were that was good. We're trying to say, let's become something that the Constitution says that we should be. I think that's the hardest part.
Absolutely. We've been conditioned, right? All of us, and this is where in the conversations that I have with people, be it online or in my personal relationships, is that we've all been conditioned to accept, first of all, the white body as center, as the center of this country. You know, as you say, we've been conditioned in a racist society, in a racist system that is run by a racist system. And then, you know, that system includes capitalism and includes, you know, there's a number of things that, well, some will put capitalism at the top, but that's a whole other thing.
Right.
But, excuse me, but I think that what makes it so difficult now is that it's really, we're really at a point where people they have to back up and say, how have I perpetuated racism? And how can I recondition my mind, and what work can I do? And people are afraid to do that work because it's uncomfortable. It makes us step back and see the ways our families may have perpetuated these systems, may have maintained them, and that is uncomfortable work.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of what Nina said, I just think I think primarily the white race is afraid to confront the history because the history is almost a lie. Like their image of, you know, the white race and superiority and dominance, it's all been built on the backs of Black people and oppressed people. And to have to face that, to think that everything I have, all this wealth, everything that I have, all these advantages over these Black folk and then other minority groups has just been pretty much, we've stolen that. And that is just a fact in this country. It has been stolen and just built on the backs of Black people and through slavery and all of that.
Right.
So, and I think, I don't think that's something, especially the older generation, like white people, they don't want to confront that because it's a scary thing. It's not anything that they know, and they don't want to admit it.
And here's the hard part about that. White supremacy and white privilege. For a white person, I'm not gonna speak on behalf of all white people, right? But for a white person, it's not white supremacy and white privilege. It's normal. So it's like having that dude in your family that's doing crazy things, right? And for a long time, you were told that Uncle so-and-so forth was da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then you get to a certain age and you're like, wait a minute. Uncle so-and-so forth wasn't all that you told me he was. He had so and so forth. And then when you confront, so first of all, you have to come to that realization that, wait a minute, the things that I thought were normalized, because I don't want to really make it seem like all white people are walking around, and I totally agree with you, but I don't want to make it seem like all white people are walking around like I'm superior than somebody else. I got more privilege than somebody else. But those things are facts and they're normalized. So just in normal, I had a good friend of mine, man, when this stuff was happening, he called me. He said, Sean, man, you know, we hang out and stuff, and he's a white dude. He's like, hey, good friend of mine. We hang out and stuff. I got a good white friend, right? No, we hang out and stuff, and he was like, man, you know, I never really hear you complain about this stuff. So have you ever experienced? And no, he was just being real and honest. Have you ever experienced this? I said, bro. I said, listen. You know, when you start the conversation, bro.
All right, so boom.
I said, all right, so boom. I said, do you know? I said, here's a perfect example. I'm an agent, but I'm an investor. I said, there's a house right now that I drive by that's for sale. It'd be a great investment. And I want to pull into that house and so on and so forth, but it's off of like 45 miles an hour, and you actually have to pull into the house. I said, I'm not pulling into that house, man. Because I'm pulling into their property. I'm 6'4" Black dude, gonna walk up in the door. Hey, I want to invest in the house and know more about that. I said, nah, I'm sitting here driving by trying to slow up as much as possible, trying to take pictures with my camera. Right. I was like, that is so part of my reality that I don't even think twice that that's wrong. Right. And I think for certain white folks, some of the privilege that they have are so part of their reality that they don't even realize, wow, this is a privilege that I had that came from this place. Right. And so I think when we talk about white superiority and white privilege, I think there are a few white people that literally are trying to keep the white race as the dominant race. And I think there's a larger majority that are awakening and saying, man, look at our history. This is how we got here. That's why the ghetto is the ghetto.
So in the initial question, asking why is it so hard for us to talk about it, you said stuff like fear and the unknown. And I believe in order for something to be corrected, you can't be afraid to confront it. So, and a lot of our responses have been reflective of talking about the history of this country and because it was founded in this way. So you mean to tell me that all of our founding fathers weren't perfect and blameless people who were just, you know, everybody received the same equal treatment, and this country wasn't built on everybody having liberty and justice for all? Is that what you all are saying? That
ain't nobody fooling with you, Chris.
Yes, it's not true. Right. And they don't teach. It's not something that we learn in the school system. Right. It's like erased history. It's erased history. As we all know, it's erased history. We don't learn about this. I have been ignorant my whole life. I'm just now starting to educate myself. I would have never learned this in school.
Why do you think that we can live in a place where we're taught our country's foundation, our history is one thing, but it's not the totality of the matter? Why do you think that that's such a normal thing? Because for a lot of us, that's normal.
Go ahead, because I don't want to. Right, me and Sean are trying. We're trying to back
telling the history.
Say that again.
You look at who's telling the history, who's teaching the history. You look at the number of teachers and who's teaching who and what race are they. And, yeah, you look back at history. But to even go back to what you were saying about privilege, like predominant culture privilege, and it's just this realization that not only are we separate, but we're unequal, right? Like I was probably 6 years old. My mom always points back to it. We were driving in a Dodge Caravan, and I was in the back. The whole family's in the van. I just shouted, "Why don't we have black friends?" It was just at 6 realizing there's so much that's separate. Yeah. And then at that age, you don't realize that you think it's separate but equal. But then as you grow, as you come to an awareness, you realize no. Not only is whiteness the norm, it becomes the baseline, and it is unequal. And it sounds foolish, but I learned informally through just listening to music. Just hip hop. The hip hop my parents didn't want me to listen to, right? Because I was not only learning history, I was learning how to creatively cuss and all that other stuff. But that's how I learned who Assata Shakur was, or Fred Hampton, or the fact that the war on drugs was a war on black people. I learned all that through music. And then formal education at William & Mary, you can actually choose the classes and what you're learning, right? You can choose to take African American history and African American lit. You can choose to study those things. And like I had a powerful conversation with my mom recently where she asked me, like, do you feel like we failed you? And anytime your parents ask you that, you're like, okay, where's this conversation going? And she was like, because we didn't teach you this history. Like you didn't learn this history until you were much older. And I do think that's been a really positive part of what's happening right now is people are acknowledging history. My parents have been on a journey the past few years, reading books like Just Mercy, Stand from the Beginning, you know, like they're like, man, we didn't know these things. And I really think like that's a benefit. Obviously you have to keep pressing, keep pushing. Because otherwise, you like you said, you don't learn these things.
Yeah. So look, to that point, real quick, to that point, white people are in living rooms with 70-year-old grandmas right now talking this talk right here. And that is the good side of like what's going on. That, you know, people are really having real conversations. I had a grandmother ask me my wife's grandmother asked me some questions, and I never, Chuck D is who taught me about, Chuck D in Public Enemy is who taught me about our real history as a country, right? And I never felt, and I don't want to dominate, but I jumped in, I know you're going there. I felt the opposite. I grew up in an all-black neighborhood. I was the only white dude. I was ashamed to be white. I was embarrassed. I put Irish pride on me. I love when dudes came out in the hip-hop scene like Everlast, and because I was like, yeah, Irish. But when I realized that there was a difference and there is privilege, is two big, powerful moments for me. So I shot a guy and I went to prison, right? And I shot a black guy, not because he was black, right? Just I shot a guy.
And
happened to be black. That's the environment I was in.
Yeah.
So when that happened, I got 5 years for shooting that dude. 5 years.
Wow.
Now, if it was a flip-flop, he would still be in the joint right now.
Right.
That realization was huge to me, real huge. And then the other big moment for me just recently is me and my boy Anthony were talking, and I said, Ant, man, look, you're still in the neighborhood. You're working 2 jobs. Like, what are you doing wrong? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I was like, we all came up, and this is how we all had the same environment. He said, look, everybody assumes I came from a neighborhood. You got to tell them. And when he hit that, hit me. That is privilege. That's privilege.
Yeah.
Right. So, so to piggyback off of what you said, the music thing resonates with me.
Oh, for sure.
And I was just gonna make the point to both of your brothers' points that part of what I think that is important for white people to do and what I'm learning for sure. And I had to tell a sister this on one of my Facebook posts, like, pause. Don't take it personally.
Yeah.
No one's attacking you.
Right.
Some people do. But generally speaking, we're not attacking you for being white. We're not attacking you for not knowing.
Right.
What we are saying is now you have a responsibility to go and learn.
Right.
The same way we've had to learn how to maneuver and how to navigate this system.
Right.
You all have a responsibility to say, okay, wait, this could be a better system.
Right.
It's up to excuse me, you all to truly imagine the America that is in our Constitution. Imagine what it can be as opposed to what it's been and what it is. We can take those principles, right, and tweak them. And I think that that's the problem that a lot of people have. Again, we take these opportunities to grow, these moments that are pointed out to us, or these moments of revelation, and we feel this guilt, this shame, and this is where the enemy comes in.
Right.
Because there should be no shame and no guilt attached to any of this. If you wrong, you wrong. If you don't know, you don't know till you know. I tell people this all the time. I didn't come out knowing about Chuck D, knowing about from Wichita, Kansas. I had to learn about the Wu-Tang Clan and about who Erykah Badu was. I had to go and I was just talking to Maya about these things. She said, well, at what point, where did you start finding your voice? Like, and I said, you know what? In kind of like middle school and high school, I started getting like Jet Magazine. My mom would get Jet Magazine and get Ebony Magazine. And because I wasn't learning it in school, or I might learn about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and maybe Medgar Evers, if I saw a story, I went and I sought it out. Emmett Till, what is this?
Right. So
who is this?
Right.
I had to go do the work.
Right.
And this is as a black girl growing up.
Right.
But I didn't have anyone sewing this into me. The privilege, right, that you have having parents who were educated, right? If I understand your background correctly, your father was a pastor, yes. I didn't have that.
Right.
And so so even on a personal level, I have to do the work to educate myself, and I've had to. And white people have to step back, pause, feel the discomfort, allow yourselves to feel the discomfort, and then move forward from there and say, okay, how am I going to get beyond this moment right now?
Cool. Yeah, I think to all of that, I think it puts us in an interesting place for a few reasons. I'll start here. We talked about, basically paraphrasing, we've been conditioned that America, personally, is first of all, is the dominant culture, but more so whiteness, we'll speak to whiteness, is the aim. That's the bar to be, for us to achieve. Now, I throw this out for discussion. Why do we think that is? For example, for me, like, just to put this out here on the table, when you say American, most people automatically mean that that's white.
Google it.
Right. And then why is it that when you say American, that's white, but everything else has to have a precursor? I have to be an African American, or I have to be an Asian American. I have to be a Latin American. That just further perpetuates that white is the standard of what America is. However, America is painted to be this place of wonderful diversity.
Yeah.
This place of accepting of not of everything, but accepting of multiple religions and races and ways of life. However, we're taught that whiteness is the standard and you have to achieve whiteness and then you'll be accepted. So that's one point that I like to make. Two, speaking of music, how powerful music is.
Yes.
For me, now many of y'all don't know, my father is a pastor, but my father was born in 1932, so my dad was old. But he was a very heavily active in civil rights. My father actually marched with Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy and John Lewis and all that stuff. So I come from that. My dad was the president of the NAACP. So I grew up going to NAACP meetings 7 o'clock on Mondays at Bethel AME in Hampton. I used to do that every Monday at 7 o'clock. So my life has been revolved around that, but musically, I didn't really get into it for real. My mind didn't get conscious of it until 94, 95, Outkast and Goody Mob. Like that was the thing that did it for me. Not only was the music great, but the lyrics were like, they're talking about social injustice and this is sounding amazing. Like, so just the power of music and how that transcends culture and race and all of that. So which moves me to this next point. Why do we, in speaking of diversity, right? Why is it that although America is painted as this diverse place, why is it that we don't fully embrace diversity? Do we feel like diversity is celebrated or is diversity just tolerated?
It's a good look.
Mm.
Yeah.
So it's
The idea of it.
The idea of it. It's like, you know, diversity in the military, diversity in the police force. Like, it looks good, but it's not just because of white superiority and white dominance. We can't fully embrace it because then white superiority is not, I guess, dominant. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but you know what I'm like. It looks good as long as we stay at the top.
Yeah.
So how do we deconstruct that?
I don't know if. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I definitely agree with that. I think a lot of people look at diversity as embracing cultures, but it's not. Because right now we have a group of diverse people,
Right.
but that doesn't mean I'm embracing your culture or, you know, whatever the case is. And I think that, you know, like Maya was saying, so, you know, we want to portray diversity and have all these different colors and cultures. So that means, you know, we're good because it's a look, but that doesn't mean that I'm getting to know somebody and I want to embrace that culture. I want to get to know the person, not just for their culture, but for them, somebody that looks different to me. But yeah, I think definitely a lot of people just think as, you know, that look, same just going on.
Like, it looks good, but how does it really look when you like dig, you know, deep into the system? How does it really look for people that are of color versus, you know, people that are white for the majority? How does it really look in this system? How does diversity, what do the neighborhoods look like? What do the schools really look like?
Right, and that is exactly the point that I'm over here bubbling. I've heard this point in looking back at my own life, growing up in Wichita, had tons of diverse friends. I had, you know, I was bused, so, you know, but my white friends from school didn't come to my house.
Yeah.
Right? I was in their world. They didn't have to be in mine. That's the thing about diversity. And when it comes to, that means that there's something, like you said, the standard is here, the center is here, and then we diverse from that. So that's the mentality that people have. And I think that what it's going to take for America to truly be this melting pot, because here I am at 40, 41 years old, and I've met white people who have never seen black folks in their lives. Like, I'm an auctioneer. That is a white male dominated industry. And I've been to school and been to convention and places where people are looking at me like I'm an alien, and they're whole adults. And so the fact that I think that what will really bring the idea of America as this melting pot in this diverse society will take individuals, like you say, stepping out of their comfort zone and doing, again, it all goes back to doing the work, and building cross-cultural and cross-racial relationships that take you out of your comfort zone. I've had white friends, like I said, I've been to their houses. A lot of them have never been to mine. You made a point, or someone over here made the point that, Sean, you said that somebody asked you, have you always felt this way? And I've had some of my white classmates, first of all, I haven't seen y'all like 25 years, one, okay? B of all, yes, clearly you didn't know me that well because I had this voice in high school.
Right.
But you didn't have to hear this side of me.
Right. Yeah, right.
You didn't have to. My own pastors, when Donald Trump was, I'm trying to be careful with my words. when Donald Trump was elected, I was called into the office the next day because I had things to say on Facebook about the church in general, like, what are you doing?
Right.
Yeah. And they called me and like, honey, what are you, why are you, isn't this divisive? No, ma'am.
No, right.
You just don't know me as well as you think you do.
Right. So since we're talking about diversity, right? Many of you probably have heard me say this statement. I believe that when diversity is celebrated, unity is established and harmony is achieved, right? All right, so why is it, I'll say it again, when diversity is celebrated, unity is established and harmony is achieved. So why is it that, why is it so hard for America to celebrate diversity, and then why are we, which I think is going to lead to this part, is in order for diversity to be celebrated, it has to be submitted to. So why is it that we have such a hard time submitting to diversity and then celebrating diversity?
Because we haven't had to.
Right, because we haven't had to.
We haven't had to. So if you wanted to get a job, you had to speak a certain way. You couldn't have no dreads.
Right.
Yeah.
You couldn't do what oh man, my boy on Sports Center that passed away. Boom Shakalaka, Stuart Scott. You couldn't be on Stuart. You couldn't be an anchor man and be like, you know what I'm saying, boom shakalaka, and do all that type of stuff. You had to be, welcome to the. There was a certain format that you had to line up to because diversity wasn't celebrated, and I think, one of the ways to even get there is to celebrate diversity. So allow the man with dreads to do the report. Allow the person to be in the industry that they've never been in before. And because it's been established and it's almost like in stone, we really have to get uncomfortable. Because let's be honest, because we've heard the same story and the same narrative for such a long time, now when we're coming to one another, black people have ideas about white folks and white folks have ideas about black folks. Now we have to almost be willing to rewrite the narrative and say, you know what, let me give this person a chance. Instead of already writing the narrative on them. Now you might find out the narrative's the same, but we have to be willing to give each other a chance and learn from each other. And here's the other thing. African American history is American history. So when John Lewis passed and C.T. Vivian, when he passed, I put a post up and I said, these are American legends. It's so funny because even for black and white folks, because you're not used to seeing black faces as an American legend, words are so powerful, especially as an artist. Words are powerful, so you have to continue to say those things and perpetuate those things so that you can rewrite the narrative. These are American legends, and just as great as we want to maybe paint Lincoln or JFK, they're in the same exact, they're not African American legends, they're American legends. So we have to be willing to rewrite the narrative, and then as we approach one another, as I approach a white person, I can't automatically, expect that he don't want my freedom and he ain't But at the same thing, as a white person approaches me, he can't, oh man, he's gonna be all better or whatever, so on and so forth. And I think that's the hard part, is rewriting that narrative.
Somebody else want to jump in here? Somebody was talking about.
In terms of unity, I think it's so hard and so elusive because we mistake diversity with uniformity. Like you were saying, to have harmony, there's got to be different voices, different cultures. If it's all uniform, there's no harmony. It's all one melody. And like you talk about a melting pot, but for most of my life, I never melt, right? Again, you need my flavor because I am white, right? For most of my life, I didn't have to, unless I was intentionally seeking diversity. I didn't have to step out of like whiteness being the center. And that's hard too for a lot of people to talk about whiteness. Like for white people, when we talk about race and racism, it's always black people or people of color. Rarely do we ever talk about whiteness and what that means, right? and the fact that it is the baseline, and we don't have to melt. That's one of it. Another one is just knowing, because you start talking about racism, right? And nobody wants to be a racist, right? And we so often think of racism as like an event, and we're such an individualistic society. Everything is individual. Like, well, I'm not a racist. Yeah, but there's a difference between prejudice and discrimination and racism. Like prejudice is bias. You have a brain, you have bias. Like you're born. Anybody who says I don't have a bias, you don't have self-awareness either, right? But no, so like if I never, like you said, there's people who've never had a black person in their home or like in their life. You cross one on the street, that's something you're not familiar with. You fear it, and that's prejudice. And then discrimination is acting on that, and then once you act on that, you get racism, which is systemic. But just even explaining that to people, because we all have prejudice. And when we start acting on that, that's discrimination. And then there's a racist system. So
I think something important to know about diversity is that proximity is not diversity.
That's fine.
And that is something that I had to learn. Growing up, I had a couple of different experiences. So I lived in a neighborhood where I was one of two white people. But then growing up a little bit, more into my teenage years, I lived in a all-white middle-class neighborhood. So with that said, yes, I grew up in a neighborhood where, around mostly black people. But when I grew up, when Black Lives Matter started, I was one of those people that said all lives matter, just to be completely honest. And that was because of my ignorance, because I didn't understand. I'm like, okay, yeah, of course Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter too, Right. But which is something that has been emphasized recently, that all lives matter, all lives don't matter until Black Lives Matter as well. And so that's why I wanted to point out that proximity doesn't mean diversity. Just because you have a black friend, just because you have a black husband or wife, that doesn't even mean anything. You have to have conversations, you have to listen, you have to put aside your pride, and just, like what you were saying, just to be humble and to be okay with being wrong, to be okay with making mistakes, to be okay with saying things that might not be right in the moment or might come off the wrong way. Like that is one thing that I have been struggling with is, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing, I don't want to offend.
Right.
But that can't be at the forefront, because if that's the case and I'm playing it safe, then we're never going to get to a place where we are like we're hearing each other. And if you're whatever color you are, if you're afraid of speaking out, don't be afraid to speak out. Just we're gonna hit bumps along the way, but if you have friends beside you, say, hey, maybe you could say that a little bit differently, or that's okay, and you may mean one thing but it comes out another way. Just don't be afraid to speak out just because of that, and don't be afraid to really get to know your white coworker or black coworker or whoever. Just have conversations, honest conversations, and just put aside pride. And
like what we're saying, it takes intentionality and it takes honest relationships to have them. I love what you're talking about. The proximity doesn't mean that you like. That's so interesting, because most people, when we talk about racism, I can't be racist, I got a black friend, or I can't be racist, I have a white friend, I have other, but that doesn't mean that. So we're talking a lot about, you made an interesting point about we're so individualistic, and when we talk about this topic of racism, we always want to make it individual, and it is some individual work that has to be done. But Justin, you brought up this point of a systemic racism, where we've been conditioned to a system, right? And when we talk about this system of racism and white supremacy, people are often offended because you think that it's an attack on you personally. But believe it or not, we all are affected by white supremacy. Yeah. White people are affected by white supremacy, and black people are affected by white supremacy. Whiteness is something that we all are dying from. For example, whiteness in certain places of healthcare. There are certain healthcare things that were put in place, plans that thought they were done to benefit more black people, but there are actually white people that are suffering from that as well, because white supremacy is ruling that. So whiteness is affecting all of us. So let's talk about the system of white supremacy. So I'll start out with here. What do we think that is the notion of systemic racism, is that real, or is that just a myth?
Yeah.
Or is that just something that we've come up with to not to mask what an issue is? Is systemic racism real?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say, and I'll get back to this real quick. I do want to piggyback on this here, just that the idea of having a black friend. White people may see me as a black woman as an exceptional example.
As the exception. Yeah.
As the exception. Hmm. So they may look at me different than they look at the young lady with her bonnet on downtown, right, or in Walmart, or whatever the case may be, right? Oh, well, Nina's not one of those. So until people can get to a point where they love people because of who they are, because of their humanness, as you mentioned, right? That relationship won't even come about, right, because you're looking for a specific type of black person, black woman, whatever the case may be. Now that all, of course, again that's 1,000,000,000,000% tie back into the system that has conditioned us. Right. This system of white superiority. And like Sean said earlier, this is definitely a system that has been intentionally established in this country, and everywhere from education to housing to the medical field, literally everything. And again, we could take it even back up to capitalism, but that's tiny altar. Y'all gonna have to have a whole other conversation on that. But it is gonna take the conversations with the uncles, with the aunties, with your parents, with the elders in the white community and these white families to chip away at, and people get so overwhelmed with the system that they don't even want to try to have these conversations, because they're like, and you hear this a lot with white folks, I can't say anything right, this is not going to say anything at all. We don't have to take the whole system on at once. Right. It's impossible. Right.
So let's speak to something that is a part of systemic racism. Let's just take one thing. Give our audience an example of systemic racism.
Oh, I got this.
Go ahead, take it. No, crime laws. Crime laws.
Crime laws.
Yep, go for it.
Powder cocaine versus crack cocaine.
Yep. Come on.
Right.
So explain that to people that may not know what you're talking about.
All right. So you have, let's say I have a gram of powdered coke. Okay. And my man Sean's got a gram of crack.
The rock. Yep.
Right. And using both the black and white example, because this is what it was set up.
Yep. Exactly. Yep.
I'm getting probation. Yep. Sean's getting a mandatory 5 years. Right. My probation is going to be informal probation. Again, with our audience, and I know we're in a room full of pastors and worship leaders.
Go for it.
But I know what probation is and parole. Yeah. And I know what high control parole is, which Sean would be on when he got out. Right. And I know what informal probation. And so informal probation would be don't get in trouble again. Right. So that, when people say that there's no systematic racism, right? Now, I'm not a big stir the pot kind of guy with a lot of this stuff, right? But if you tell me there's no systematic racism, it's ignorance. It's right there in front of you in laws. From the beginning, slavery, it's over. It's done, right? And then you can lock up people for anything. Now, they made the law, that it was the law that they would lock up, so it didn't look crazy. They said we could lock up blacks, whites, Mexican, whatever, Indians, right? We get Native American, everybody gets locked up. Yet they were only locking up black dudes for loitering,
Low-level crimes.
And getting years
Right.
for that, because that was the little slavery part that was in the 13th Amendment, right? So that's the part that allows it, and it goes on to this day. When I was in prison, there's a thing called prison industries, PIA.
Come on.
Right? And in PIA,
$1 billion.
yeah, PIA lens crafter. I worked at a lens crafter's facility, right? In Jamestown, California, SCC, 3 yard, right? That's what we did, right? That's what we did. We worked on glasses.
Yep.
You're getting paid 8 cents an hour to work on glasses. Now people say, well, they're criminals. Okay, fine. I get all that. If you didn't make $50 a pair selling it to lens crafters for them to make $150 a pair selling it to Sean for $200. You see what I'm saying?
Free labor.
So why wouldn't everybody be like, getting to your capitalist point? I'm a capitalist. I sold a business. I love it. I love money. But I mean, I'm keeping it real. Right? But that's what drives it all. That's what drove it from the beginning. Free labor, slavery.
Yes.
You're taking away my free labor.
Power and money.
Yeah, it's money, money, money.
Right.
Sorry, I got off.
That was great.
That was
We needed to hear that.
Yeah.
Talking about the prison system, Sean, as a realtor, and I think you know where I'm trying to go.
You got 3 hours in hand?
You know where I'm trying to go with this. We talk about systemic racism. So we talked about it as far as the drug industry. What he was talking about, what Tim was alluding to was, if we're familiar with the war on drugs in the 80s and 70s and 80s, that was that whole thing, which led into the crime bill in '93, which there are people still in prison now from that. So that's a part of the system.
Can I jump in real quick before you? We need to take that to the extent of it was for money. It's $4.
Yes.
It's free labor. That prison industry thing is a real deal. And it's business.
Yep.
It's business.
It's business.
And that's where that ends up. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's great. I mean, it's all about money and that power. So Sean, talk about systemic racism from that line of work that you do, because you do so many. But from that line,
Yeah. So when it comes to housing, so I got a trillion thoughts.
Right.
First of all, when people see ghettos, so one of the things that's come up with this conversation is, what about black on black crime?
Right.
Something like Chris Rock. Black on black crime, right? People seem to think that black people love living in impoverished areas, killing each other and selling drugs. That's the nature of a black person.
Right.
So when somebody says, what about black on black crime? That's the first thing that comes in my head.
Okay.
Because really what you're saying is, well, that's where y'all chose to live. Federal housing laws allowed black people to live in the suburbs in 1968. I was born in 1976. 1968 is when laws said, hey, look, all the discrimination that we've been doing since the late 1800s, since slavery was abolished, and then we had tenements and we had rents, and then we started building houses, and then we came up with the FHA loan. Well, which side note, people don't like welfare because of the subsidy, but so is the VA loan, the FHA loan, the child tax credit, but that's a whole nother conversation. When the FHA loan came up in the early to mid 1900s, which now allowed a person to amortize a mortgage over 30 years instead of 10 years interest, and then you pay the whole note. Now you can have a mortgage for 30 years. Housing blew up. We're talking about 30s, 40s. How all of a sudden Americans start buying houses. In these areas where Americans begin moving out into the suburbs, as we know them, black people were not allowed to move. As a matter of fact, it was government FHA laws that basically said, real estate agents, as a builder, if you allow a black person into your subdivision, into your neighborhood, we will not loan you the money, or we will not give you the tax credits. If you allow black people into your neighborhoods. These were local, state, and federal laws. You can actually go back and read old FHA pamphlets from the 1930s and 40s that literally have these covenants and deeds and these trainings that is training real estate agents that say, do not allow black people in these areas. The areas that we will allow them in are the less desirable areas. You can go right here in Newport News and go down Chestnut Avenue on 42nd and Chestnut, And the one thing that will never happen in a white suburban neighborhood is that they will never build a Norfolk Grumman or industry with smoke and pollution. But black people were forced to not only live in the worst areas of town, but then they were zoned so that industries. So how come black people have asthma?
Yeah.
Right.
High levels of diabetes? Because they're living in areas where they're producing all kind of smoke and toxins, so on and so forth. So as this revolution started happening in America and neighborhoods were being built, right at the point when suburbs and subdivisions were established, 1968. You know what? We were wrong. Y'all go ahead and move up in there. Well, they're pretty much all white. There's some of the exceptional, the twice as good blacks that are in there. Most of us are now in the neighborhoods. But that's where y'all want to be anyway. And so that's one of the issues. Here's the other issue, equity. You buy a home for $7,000. 15, 20 years later, the home is $75,000. You take that equity and give it to your kids. The number one thing that we pass down to our children in this country is equity. And the average white person passes down about $30,000 to their kids, where the average black person passes down about $7,000 to their kids. The reason that this happens is because of equity in a home. $7,000, 75, the color law talks about this, $75,000, now the house is $150,000. 3 generations where I've passed down equity to allow you to take that money and go buy another house or buy a bigger home or start your own business. Black people were not afforded this equity. So the reason in our family, we have a nice home, live in a nice area, but that's why I never have the conversation about it being class, because white middle class coming from equity that's been built up, you might be taking care of you, your wife, and your 2 kids. Black middle class, where you're one of the few ones that's making it, you taking care of your 2 cousins, you taking care of your mama, your grand, because they never were allowed to build up equity over decades and pass it down generationally. So housing, this country planned when segregation and discrimination, and part of our issue is because we don't live around one another. That's part of the issue. Of course, there's tons of other stuff, and I totally hear what you're saying. I mean, you're so right that just because we're around one another doesn't mean that we we're gonna know about one another. But that's where it starts. It can't end there. But it starts by you living next to me living next to you. Now, if it stops there, you know what I'm saying, you're 100% right. But then if we start engaging and we start building, we don't live around one another. So now here's the other problem with that. A diverse neighborhood. In black people's mind, talking about white flight, in black people's mind, a diverse neighborhood is about 30 to 40% black. In a white person's mind, a diverse neighborhood is about 10% black. When that neighborhood actually gets to about 15 to 20%, white flight starts happening.
So and neighborhood white flight?
White flight is basically the idea, again, that came from the federal housing. You just read about the Federal Housing Administration. Good Lord. But it's the idea, and here's how white people were finessed. Because you made the great point that white superiority hurts white and black people. A black person or 2 will move into a neighborhood, right? So they did something called blockbusting. They would go to the white neighborhood and say, hey, look, we got these black folks moving in. It's gonna bring your property value down. Hey, why don't you sell me this house? You're doing this to white people, you're doing this to your own? Why don't you sell me this house for, $30,000, $40,000 less? They get that house for $40,000, $30,000 less. Now they have equity. Then they bring in a black person, they sell it to them for very, very high price with covenants and deeds that say if you miss one payment, you're out of here. And they just continue to repeat the cycle. And so it really hurt all Americans because we weren't allowed to live around one another. So now some of these neighborhoods, like in Chicago is a great class. I'm gonna stop talking. But if you look at certain places like Lawndale or some of these higher resident subdivisions where these covenants and deeds, there's even covenants and deeds that when you move to these subdivisions, it's in the covenant and deed. And one of the things people are saying is, how can we get rid of this covenant and deed that says black people can't live here? And it says, don't do that. Just say that you ignore it, but keep it there because that's history. Because this is why the equity when it comes to housing and passing on wealth that comes from equity hasn't happened, and why our ghettos look the way that they look. So it's the housing to me, is one of the major issues that has led to this division and really a whole bunch of other divisions when it comes to
That's so good. So we talked about systemic racism. That's where we were. That's where we are. We give two great examples of that and how. I mean, there are tons that, and both of those things spill into our results of other things. You're talking about housing, and you can't not talk about housing and not talk about public education system. You can't talk about education without talking about the school to prison pipeline. And you can't start talking about school to prison pipeline without talking about mass incarceration. You can't start talking about mass incarceration. You start talking about the drug laws. Then you talk about gun law. All of that stuff goes together, and it's all about power and money. All right. Okay. So just to turn the plow a little bit. All right. So talk about systemic racism. Right. Talk about why it's so hard to talk about racism. Let's talk about where we currently are as a nation in America. All right. I believe right now, personally, that we are in. I can't even call it a modern civil rights movement because that kind of already happened, but a resurgence or another wave of the modern civil rights movement. All right, so civil rights movement, Dr. King, 60s, all of that, Dr. King, Malcolm X, John Lewis, Abernathy, Jesse Jackson, all of that time period was great, and we saw great in some aspects. We saw some improvement, some things happened. We got Voting Rights Act signed, which is still, we still have to vote on that. Like, we still, I don't know if people know that, but it's not like that. So the Voting Rights Act gave Black people the right to vote, but it still has to be voted upon every 40 years. So it's not like it's set in stone. There is a possibility, there is a chance that the next time they vote about that, the government can say, nah, we're not allowed Black people to vote no more. That's still a possibility. So even that, we have, some people look at that as progress, but then you look at that, but then you see that it's still not progress. All right, enough of that, because I'll go on for days. So looking at that civil rights movement, seeing that where we are now, what makes this time so different than, or is it different? What's so unique? I'll put it like that. What's so unique about this one? Why does it feel so different this time? Now, of course, I'm baiting y'all with it. So, like, what is so different this time? Somebody try to jump in. Yeah. We haven't heard much from you.
I was listening, man.
Yeah, you can talk.
I bless God for y'all. But this year, I would like to call it the year of like demolition, like where we are pretty much unlearning a lot. I had to unlearn a whole lot. So I really do appreciate the fact that COVID is happening right now. It's like the perfect storm. You know what I'm saying? And it's forcing us to sit in the house, quarantine.
No distractions.
No distractions. And you know, like I said, I found myself, unlearning and learning some things about my own culture. So I will say in a nutshell that what's different now is the fact that just the America in the whole, it's like people are more aware now of what's going on.
Awareness.
Yeah, so I'll leave it at that.
Yep.
People aren't accepting shut-up money, which is what you were talking about. That exactly what you're saying. You got the right to vote. We reserve. In 40 years, we can vote on this again. Like, people aren't accepting shut-up money.
Right.
Everybody's not just happy with, painting Black Lives Matter on Washington, D.C., right? So that's one thing. I agree with the COVID thing. I think COVID was the best thing to happen to this nation because you do have the grandmothers, the 70-year-old grandmother in there talking. And again, this is not a popular opinion, especially as a Christian, for me to say, but I got in big fights with a bunch of white family because I said, that the riots are what makes people pay attention.
Sure.
Right? So the same thing with COVID, right? So people are paying attention because there's this other trauma going on. Do you follow what I'm saying? So I think that, and I honestly think in my whole life, I'm 47 years old. My whole life, I've never ever seen so many people, and I don't even care why. They're talking about Roger Goodell, saying, I made a mistake by not letting them kneel, and now people can kneel. And they say, well, that's for money. no crap.
Right.
Okay. However we get there, it's fine.
Yeah, right.
Right? In my mind. So it started with money, and if dude wants to take it, or the Redskins change it when they got pressure, so what?
Yeah.
So what? So I haven't seen, personally myself, haven't seen in 47 years this much change.
Yeah.
I think as an 80s kid, I ran around in the 80s kid, around crack cocaine and all that stuff. Race was ignored. Was ignored until just like people just like, I mean, we're talking Rodney King got beat 29 years ago.
Yeah.
Dang.
And we're talking about it today. 29 years ago, Rodney, and I lived in California during all that stuff, right? And for a hot minute, everybody talked about it. That was it.
Yeah.
Right? But we just watched a show just recently on National Geographic that replayed all that stuff. It was just 29 years ago. You know, it shocks me when you say 68, 1968. That's recent history, right?
Right.
But even more recent, when Rodney King had, them dudes were talking about we got to beat down the jungle on the witness stand.
Yeah.
And people were like,
94. My first year of college.
and they were cool with it. So you want to talk about recent history. But anyways, we didn't talk about it since then.
Yeah.
Right.
Then COVID came.
Right.
Other things started happening. And now people are really, the awakening like you're talking about has happened. And it's a good thing.
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons why. Wait, somebody else jump in.
And modern technology is a beautiful thing.
Come on.
That's good.
Because we just have access at our fingertips. You know, we can't get this stuff. We couldn't get it in the textbooks, back in the day.
Right.
But we have it now. We can do all the research. We can keep the conversations going through like platforms such as this one. And so, and I think like millennials and this generation's a lot more. I think this generation wants better, like a better America. Right. I know me personally as a mother, I want a better America for my daughter. I want a better America for my family members, that are people of color. I want just, and it just motivates me to just continue educating myself and to keep the conversation, and to act too, because, it can't just be a conversation and stop there. Because I really like Black Lives Matter painted on a sidewalk or a street, that's cool, but if the schools don't change and these systems don't change, like I am not satisfied with that. The systems have to change. We have to give these children, the future generation, a chance at freedom, not what we call freedom here, but at real freedom, to be productive contributors, not just to be oppressed.
To piggyback off of that, I just think what's different is the wave is so big because of technology and we're able to speak. But like you were saying, my hope is that there's action behind it. And then I just know, like you were saying with Rodney King, you talk about it for a little bit and then you forget about it. Like it feels like an eternity ago that like Alton Sterling, right? Brandon Castillo, those two Dallas police officers got shot. And then there was a wave. And then I know for white people, the white church, you ride the wave and then you go back. There's no, you call it racial stamina. Like we run a sprint. We run like 100 meters every 5 years, a couple years, and then it's back to life because we can just turn that switch off and live in privilege. Right. So I hope that, because man, just what was it, like a month ago? There was a video that came out. It was just a case of mistaken identity. Something happened at a bank. They greet some guy on the street, take him down, break his ribs. He's weeping, and I'm just like, I see that in the morning, and for the rest of the day, I couldn't work. I couldn't focus. I was so stirred up and just tore up. Like I could not write, my job. That was the day I reached out to her and I was like, man, I'm praying for you, because there was this realization that's your everyday reality. People like me, we get to turn that switch on and off. The awareness, the pressing and pushing. And we get to ride the wave, but are you gonna keep swimming?
That's a big one. Videos, like we're capturing all this. We're seeing all these videos of injustice and all this stuff happen. That's a big one too. I completely missed that. But we see it. It's in our faces. We cannot deny it. It's not like, oh, this happened. They said this happened. No, it did happen. It's right in your face.
Right, you see it.
And I mean, we even saw this in 2014 and 15, with, I think that's when Michael Brown was murdered first. That's the first thing. And what's crazy is how many names.
I literally,
like you just said, Alton Sterling, and I was like, oh, like I had forgotten about that one, and it makes me feel terrible that I had forgotten about it. But again, COVID has us in this space where we can't. What are we turning back to? You know, the things that we're turning back to are limited.
Right.
I think that what is also happening right now, is that because we see ignorance and like the how do I want to say it? Like the support of ignorance from the top. And the excuses that are being made for ignorance, like actual ignorance, not just like, oh, you an idiot. No, like actual ignorance is being,
master's level.
Like master's level ignorance. Okay, like you got a PhD in ignorance. Right. But the fact that we're seeing this how do I want to say it? Lord help me. We're all being challenged to commit ourselves intellectually to our world in general.
Okay.
So we're seeing ignorance from the very top, like flat out clear cluelessness. And I think there are a lot of us who are like, oh no. I can't be that, or the trickle down that's happening from there. Like, I want to know. I want to read the books. I want to read the articles. I want to know what Bell Hooks has to say. What Cornel West has to say. I want to know what these different James Cone. There's all these different people awake, because I know that it has challenged me this whole season. And the difference, I was telling Maya this before we got started, that the difference that has really come up for me has been that I have been challenged intellectually in a way that I have not been in some time.
Come on, yes.
And that doesn't mean that I'm going back to school and getting my PhD in things just yet. Or even my bachelor's, because I got the debt and no degree, but whatever. We're working on that. But I have always, going back to what I said earlier, always been the one to go and try to get the information for myself. I got laxed in that in my 20s and even on into my 30s, because it was easier, especially as I came back to the church and came back to Christ, for me to say, well, Jesus loves us all. Okay, but I've recently been challenged. The Lord has said, pause. Again, that pause that we have to take to step back and say, where am I lacking in this conversation? Where am I lacking in my knowledge? There's a ton of knowledge that I don't have around what my civic responsibilities are. Right. The way our system, our political system works. It's so politicized because of our ignorance around the system.
Yeah. Right.
So many of us don't know. So it's going to take... It's going to take us having an opportunity to challenge ourselves, to commit ourselves intellectually, to challenge ourselves to grow on whatever that looks like, be it through conversations, be it through books, through podcasts, whatever the case may be. And then for believers to take it back to the word and say, okay, Lord, how does what I'm learning line up with the word? And then where do you want me to go from here? Right. And then it's going to take us each taking these seeds that we're receiving and going out and planting them in the world. Right. Yes. And it's this whole energy around all of this that I just said. I hope I'm not just rambling, but I hope I'm making sense. That is the thing that I think will sustain us past this moment, this particular season. It'll take it, and we got to take this momentum and understand again that all of this is a continuum. We can't think of it as an I've arrived. White people can't say I've arrived, I'm not racist. Right. When you're perpetuating and still benefiting from a racist system. Right. So again, it always goes back to my individual work and my willingness to commit to this long term, beyond the performance art. And I'm a performance artist, so I appreciate the murals, but whatever.
I mean, we could go on for days about this. I mean, every topic of discussion, we could go on for another day about it. But unfortunately, we don't have that time here today. But thank you to all of you for your time, your talent, your treasure that you've given, your wisdom. Even though you may think that you didn't have enough to add to the conversation, just your presence and your interaction has spoken volumes, and I believe people are going to be able to receive so much and ultimately be blessed from our conversation. I would never want us to leave this moment in this place without giving people just a few resources, because a lot of what we talked about is learning, unlearning, deconstructing, all that stuff. So just to give, I'll give a few, and then we can, I guess, end it there. There's some things that you can watch and read. My number one go-to talking about conversation like this is watching the documentary 13th on Netflix. That's going to lead you to a lot of other things. It'll lead you to read a lot of other books, but that'll give you a visual account of the history of our country, as well as the focus of it is mass incarceration. But like we said before, you can't talk about mass incarceration without talking about redlining, without talking about school system, without talking about healthcare. It all goes together, and it's all about money and power. So watching the 13th documentary, you can pause and all that stuff as you need to. Justin made reference to a few books I was going to say. One, The Color of Compromise, talks about the church's complicity with racism. That's a whole nother 3-month conversation that we could have about how complicit the American church has been with racism. The Color of Law talks about redlining. You can read White Fragility. That's a good one. There's some others I had.
Some UC Coates. We were 8 years.
Yes. Okay. Stand from the beginning. Yep.
And for young people, Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism in Youth.
Yes.
It's Jason Reynolds partnered with Ibram X. Kendi, Dr. Kendi, who did Stamped from the beginning, and they did a phenomenal job at just making the history of America plain for young people to understand. And for me, I went and listened to it and was like,
Yes.
And so getting young people involved in this as well, and showing them their place in the conversation now and in the change for our future.
That's so good. Oneness Embrace, Tony Evans. Be the Bridge by Latasha Morrison. That's a good one too. How to Be an Anti-Racist. Jamar Tisby's coming out with another book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Well, it's a book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, but he's got a spin-off on that. So those are good. The other challenge I would give is all those books that we mentioned, they were written by a diverse group of authors. They are not all black people talking about racism. A lot of those were written by white people. Color of Law was written by a white man. So White Fragility is written by a white person. So get a diverse of opinions in your researching and in your learning, so that your learning isn't just, it's not biased, because that's a part of our issue as well here. So again, thank you to all of you, all of your expertise, your voice, all of that. Thank you for being here, and thanks Tiny Alter for having us, man, for extending this topic of conversation. We pray that everything has been effective, and that it'll be effective for people that are going to watch this from generations to come. So is it cool if I pray? I was just about to ask you. Okay, cool. That's cool. We'll do that. Lord, we thank you for this time that you allowed us to come together. Your word says how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. And we know that in unity, that's where the blessing comes from. It comes from us being unified. We know that in unity, we celebrate our diversity, and that we aren't looking for sameness, but we're looking for oneness in you. Just as you and the Father are one, we pray that you would make us one. Just like you've reconciled us to your Father, we pray that we will be reconciled to one another here on the earth, being a great depiction of your love and your kindness for us. So we pray that this topic of racism and injustice, because we know that that it is a part of your heart, we want it to be a part of our heart. In your word, you say you aren't impressed with our conferences and all of the things that we do in the celebrations and the songs, but you search for rivers of justice. That's what you want. So we want your burden to be our burden. Father, help us to carry one another's burdens, as the book of Galatians says, that we would carry them, not just look at them and observe them, but we would take them on, and we would learn them, and we would carry them, and that we would be the body of Christ that you've caused us to be. So thank you for this time. Let this fall on fertile ground, Father, and we pray that we would see amazing results because of your presence and because of our willingness to get in this fight and join this fight. We know that we aren't fighting against flesh and blood, but we know that it's by your Spirit that we will overcome and defeat this enemy of racism. So we thank you for this time. In the strong name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Appreciate y'all.